Yeah, it's definitely autumn. Hello and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen Andrews, and today I'm going to visit Graham Embray and we're going to do an episode of Two Grumpy Old Men Discuss SF, and today we're going to be talking about what Brian W. Aldiss called the dreaming pole. Oh yes.
See, stupid thing is I always look so small when
Yeah, it's because you're leaning back. Yeah, and you look particularly small in this because we're using the camera with a tiny screen. So there you go. But we're in higher definition now because we're in the club room, exclusive area.
Oh God!
So yeah,
so
so people can see you in even higher definition. Yeah. And we are going to show you some books. So what we're talking about, the other day when we were arranging this get together, and we were talking about doing a video for the first time in ages in the Two Grumpy Old Men Who Discuss SF series, and you'll have seen the other one on the open access of the channel. This is it came out, we were talking about reading, and we were talking about taste, and you said something about how you felt very much that a lot of the science fiction writers you really like are people who in their writing had more of the feel of fantasy, or let's just say the fantastic, rather than the nuts and bolts Hugo Gernsback engineering type people. And and I feel that thing a lot as well. And you mentioned some names.
Yeah, I've tried reading people like Asimov and Heinlein and Clarke and all these people to basically to give them the
benefit of the doubt.
And if anything, I've found I dislike their work more with time.
Yes,
it is. It is.
The more you read them, the more you hate them.
And it is the written style. It's not the plot.
No,
it's not the ideas.
No,
it's the fact the writing is so bloody dull.
Yes,
basically as dull as dishwater.
I think Matt at Bookpill gets had a lot of sort of hammering from people who like Heinlein, for example, saying and because he's a sacred cow. But it's weird.
He's a silly old cow.
A sacred cow.
Can't say that on YouTube.
I think it's funny because the other night after reading your email, I picked up Citizen of the Galaxy. Which Smudge, my cat, was reading. She wasn't reading, it was just next to her. And I started to read it.
Well, cats read by osmosis.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
They sit on books and they absorb.
And it absorbs into them.
I wish I could do that.
Yeah,
I tried sleeping on books, but it
doesn't work, does it? No. You end up with an ache just there. But I started to read it, and it's one of his better written books, I think. People say that about the juveniles, don't they? But I just can't get interested.
Red Planet.
Yes,
I remember enjoying, but I need to reread that
because it's not as if you didn't read these people early on. You read lots of Arthur C. Clarke, didn't you?
But people like David Pringle, he seems to rate the juveniles by Heinlein.
Yeah, people generally do, don't they? They say those are the well-written ones. But the point that you came to was that those sort of more nuts and bolts people weren't your thing. And you said, I'm not sure where that leaves people like Philip K. Dick and Alfred Bester, who you've obviously read. And I mean, it's probably some time since you've read them, I imagine, Cedric. So I'd be interested if you to go back and see what you think. But you definitely picked up people who Brian Aldiss says in Billion Year Spree, Trillion Year Spree, whichever edition you've got, his history of SF. There's a very memorable thing where he wrote, one writer who was very much at the dreaming pole, and like the North Pole or the South Pole, there's the dreaming pole, was Jack Vance. And Jack Vance, obviously, we've mentioned on the channel many times, and he is somebody who has that sort of very ornate thing, and there's a lot of world building again, and there's the wonderful use of language. Where I always say to people, if I'm in work, and it doesn't always work to sell Jack Vance. If Shakespeare were alive today and he were writing science fiction and fantasy, he'd be like Jack Vance. You know, it's very much that thing. But we just sort of look at a few books which, and a few writers who sort of fall into that. And we'll start with Aldiss himself. And you've got a really beautiful copy here of the Malasia Tapestry, Jonathan Cape first edition. Isn't that gorgeous? And I put this in my book, 100 Must-Read Fantasy Novels. And I think it's a fantasy novel. So we are going to touch on that a little bit in this. Now, this is from, let's have a look. What year is this? Early 70s? 1976. But there was an earlier version in orbit in 1973. And I don't mean going around the planet. It was in Damon Knight's anthology. And that's really beautiful. Look at that. Isn't that great? Super. And you've read this several times, you say?
I have, yeah. Not for many years, but it, you know, I enjoy it for the same reasons I enjoy Hot House.
Yes.
It's the writing. It's the world creation. So the thing is, when you're writing, even if you're writing a realistic novel, you're still creating a world.
Absolutely.
You know, which I think
you're being
forget.
selective.
Yeah. You are describing. And some of the kind of hard SF writers, they couldn't create an alien landscape. You know, even though that is their nuts and bolts, they can't, for me, create that at all.
Yes, a lot of SF since I started the channel. It has pushed me into a corner where I just want to read people I really like, who I know are reliable, because I've tried a lot of things which have been, which I've always suspected were average or mediocre. And then a lot of times I've read them for my own knowledge of the genre. But there is a limit to what you can do that. It does drive you nuts, doesn't it? But looking at a book which I haven't read, and again, you've been nagging me for probably, how long has this book been out? 30 odd years probably, maybe even longer. It is longer. It's 1989 because it's Unwin. I was thinking it must be late 80s. And that's The Archivist by Jill Alderman, which you have sort of waxed lyrical about this many, many times.
Well, I read it at least twice. Back, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's always been a book that stuck. You know, as one of the best I've ever read. Problem is, it's so long ago, I can't to give it a fair. But you know, I need to reread it to talk about it really. But it is a classic example of a, well, you could call it fantasy, science fiction, whatever, set in a futuristic city, which is a thing we keep coming up on.
The urban thing is a thing, isn't it?
But it is the writing, it is the characterisation, it's the female kind of aspect, which is why I like Storm Constantine. It is the characters and the world creation.
Because it's about a planet ruled by a matriarchy and science is banned. And
it's, of course, similar to Queen of Clouds.
Yes,
Or the science being banned.
Interesting. And I mean, if you look at the back of this, it's the blurbs on the back, and this is the first novel. So obviously what they had to do at Unwin is get this book to other writers and ask them to write the blurb for it. And the people who've done they're absolutely glowing statements about it are Ian Watson, Ros Caveney, and M. John Harrison. And you know, if M. John says something is good, I tend to instantly pick it up. One day I will get around to reading this.
But that has always astonished me. And nobody is aware that she exists.
But I think
it to me it is an absolutely stunning book.
How many books did she write? About 4?
4, yeah.
4,
there were 2 hardbacks, 2
and then 2 paperback originals,
which were HarperCollins.
Yeah, because Unwin, of course, at this point, this was the dying days of Unwin, 89, because at this point then, the way they went with Unwin was that because they were bought up by HarperCollins, because HarperCollins wanted the Tolkien list, and they took Jane Johnson, who was editor at Unwin. She did some great work, didn't she, Jane? Really good. And she published books like this, and M. John and Gary Kilworth, and Tanith Lee, loads of really good people. So they sort of transferred over. But as you say, and this is again a book relatively easy to pick up, I think, still. So there you go.
It's the kind of book that if somebody saw it in a bookshop when they were doing a book haul, they would just pass it by. They wouldn't even look at it.
And which is a shame, because it's the things. I find that interesting watching people. Obviously, you and I are very widely read and old and in the way and stuff. But I mean, the number of times I watch people when they do an In the Wild video, and I'm just screaming at the screen saying, don't pick that, pick that book there. And then, you know, sometimes it happens. You see people passing over, say, Modoran by David Bunch. Then all of a sudden, somebody will actually listen to what I've been saying.
I told one I saw the other day. this guy was in Froome, I think it was, and there was a copy of M.K. Joseph Holding the Zero
in paperback.
Yeah, and I thought, no, I've never seen that.
Yeah, the paperback's really rare. I should have picked it up. Yeah, if it's still the next time I go, I will. But this is the thing, you know, and eventually you see things pop up, and then it's like, God, you know, well, it's this amazing book, you know, and if you watch all my videos, then you'll mention these laughingly. But there you go. Then we move on to somebody, I mean, this is somebody who's still writing, and as a, you know, who I've always struggled with, I'll be quite honest, is Ian MacDonald, and this is Chaga, which is set in Africa.
It's after it's...
it is, isn't it? And,
it's kind of like an alien life form that transforms... You know, because again, it's another one of these intensity visual world creating. Yeah. So even if it is Earth and everything, it's
I've either read
very alien.
Part of this, in an anthology. Maybe this is a fix-up, but I remember reading about the entity in this, which sort of overtakes. Yeah. It's a bit like the crystal world, isn't it? Yeah. Except it's not crystal; it's living thing, which is just like a mass, like blob that sort of takes up. So, but looking at the blurb in this. Yeah, Saturn's moon. It comes. Yeah, it's a meteor lands and the Chaga. Yeah, it's dubbed the Chaga in memory of the first of the African tribes being engulfed. And again, I struggle with this. I struggle with him. I think his writing. I mean, Desolation. Was it Desolation Road, the first one? He reminded me a lot of Bradbury in some ways. A tinge of Cordwainer Smith, but. I like the writing, but I never find him compelling. That's my problem with him. I think the writing is good, but I never found him compelling. But you obviously have a different experience.
Well, on the basis of when I read him, but he's somebody else I need to reread.
Yeah.
So,
but I know, I think Matt at Bookpilled read, what's the one, the Indian one, River of Gods?
Yeah, he didn't like it.
He hated it, didn't he? Yeah, he absolutely hated that. And he talked a lot about the sexual content of that. Well, I've not read that one. That's quite a scarce book, actually, especially in hardcover. I mean, you've got a really nice hardcover of that. But Gollancz sort of went for it with him, didn't they, in the 90s with these jackets.
I mean, how could you not buy a book with
it's beautiful, Jim Burns wraparound, absolutely beautiful, yeah. Let's try and get Jim out on the channel one day, because he lives in Trowbridge and stuff, but he's pretty much retired, Jim. So, but yeah, I struggle with this, but... it takes over the landscape and makes it very beautiful but very alien at the same time, is what I remember. So he again is that kind of dreaming pole thing, isn't he?
Yeah, he's definitely coming from the kind of fantasy direction in terms of the written
where
style.
it's this is an interesting, because this makes me think of surrealism, and you know, if you look back at say Penguin books in the 60s and even some of the SF. And this was prevalent on J.G. Ballard's jackets, because Ballard was always referencing the surrealists. They put pictures by people like Max Ernst and Tanguay on SF covers, didn't they? And there was that association. Of course, you're talking about the unconscious. And this year is the 100th anniversary of surrealism, since it was coined as a term and launched as a movement. And, you know, there is that thing where I've always struggled to... come up with a convincing rational link between science fiction and surrealism, because I remember once being asked a long time ago, remember the time you and I first met, by a friend of mine, you know, what's the link between science fiction and surrealism? And I remember saying, well, they go hand in hand, but I couldn't really explain why, because I hadn't really thought about it before I said that. And really, it's that thing where, because science fiction uses a novum, a new thing that triggers something, it possibly, one of the things that it triggers, aside from, say, let's say, for example, something as mundane as the mobile phone. We know that the mobile phone was a classic example in the real world of the science fiction novum, where it's changed human consciousness. It has changed human consciousness, because everybody knows walking around like this. And it is absolutely a true thing. So it has worked in a very visible way. But what is it doing to people's unconscious and subconscious? And there's a YouTube channel called Joey B Toons. You've ever seen that? And Joey is he's like a cartoonist and comic book artist, and he has like a huge number of followers, and he basically comments on idiocy on social media and on TikTok, and he shows clips of videos of people doing absurd things and looking absolutely ridiculous, and he sort of comments on that. and
like
he just like this, and he despairs of the way the world's going, and he's quite funny, but really it's showing how the subconscious technology is drawing people's subconscious out onto the surface, which is one of the strange things that you don't expect from technology. We should now, because the way it's changed, human life over the last 100 years. So maybe that's the link with surrealism. So, but specifically, Aldiss mentioned Jack Vance, and we have a very beautiful Grafton copy of The Blue World, which I've got a copy of this. It's really nice. And The Blue World is probably one of Vance's most beloved singletons, isn't it? Yeah. And describe the plot, dear boy, because I know you've read it last once, haven't you?
It's a water world, where people live on like giant water lilies, kind of thing. And I can't remember the plot, frankly. So don't.
Well, isn't there like a huge sea creature, which is almost like a god
like
as well?
A kraken,
and that reminds me of. I mean, you can see the influence of that over things like Polyphemus by Michael Shea, and also in a small way on things like Medusa's Children by Bob Shaw, which I'm going to reread soon because I really like Medusa's Children. And again, basically, it's about these people fighting back against this creature, isn't it? Which is incredibly powerful. And Frank Herbert says in the back, Jack Vance is one of the greatest image makers of English letters, which is very eloquent of Frank there for somebody who you don't normally think of as eloquent. Obviously, he was at times. So you've got that very much going on, and this is one of Vance's books which got reissued at fairly regular intervals, didn't it, as well? So it's one of the sort of favourite singletons. So even though very often there is this thing in Vance where they're definitely SF, at the same time he's justifying what he's writing through, he'll have a few of the tropes. It's set on another planet. There are people out there in spaceships and what have you, but this is what's actually going on. And I see Vance as being a primary influence over some of Silverberg's later stuff. I mean, John at Sci-Fi Scavenger a while ago, he read Lord Valentine's Castle, the first of the Majapur books, and they to me seem massively influenced by Jack Vance because they're almost nothing but world building and wonders and wonderful things happening straight off and things. And I always remember the beginning of Lord Valentine's Castle where Valentine wakes up and he's lost his memory, which again is a very Zelazny thing. We've mentioned Zelazny in this context, rather like Corwin waking up at the beginning of Nine Princes in Amber. And the air is very sort of light and everything's fresh, and there's Carabella, the girl, and everything. And they've got this very dreamy thing about them, and that's always there in Vance, isn't it? So, it is, the thing is with that sort of writing is that it is about the writing itself, isn't it? It's the sheer joy of the writing itself. And I sometimes am guilty of really being interested in structure and plot and character. And I think that's because I've been looking analytically at a lot of things over the years. And sometimes it's just nice to sort of immerse yourself in the warm bath of style. That's the thing, isn't it? And speaking of style and and beauty, this is a lovely book, lovely edition, Malafrena by Ursula Le Guin, and this is a Granada from the mid-80s. And what can we say about Malafrena? It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a long time, but it's stuck in my mind. That, because with Le Guin, her, she wrote an awful lot. Well, she wrote books that could be categorised as fantasy. And some of her best-known books, like the Earthsea books and whatever. But she also wrote some of the best science fiction books.
Yes, as well.
Like Left Hand of Darkness.
Very much so. Yeah.
But I like them for the same reason.
Yeah. Interestingly, this one. On the back, it just says fiction, because this was actually quite an early one. It's all Cinean tales as well as related to this, isn't it? Because this is set in a Middle European, that's MITTEL, middle European thing. And it's meant to sort of invoke if you look at the map of Europe over hundreds of years, you'll see in Central Europe and Eastern Europe particularly, the borders and things move all the time. And Italy's we think of, and countries we think of being long established, say Italy, only unified like 150 years ago. So, and Germany again. So, it's not like Britain where it's been fairly solid for 1,000 years, apart from the theoretical invasion we're getting at the moment, as they'd say. But really, the beauty of this is that and it's interestingly categorised it as fiction even then, because the fact is she wasn't really canonised and on the agenda of general readers then the way she is now, no matter what people may say. I mean, I don't recall selling much of her work to non-genre readers at that time. No. Slightly different now, but but not then. And it is very much about the feel. It's very episodic, and there is a slightly historical thing, because I think Napoleon is mentioned in this. It's just we don't know what country Malafrena is or where it is, so it could be a stand-in for any number of those things. But this is really beautiful. If I ever see one of these, I must pick one up, because I've got a nice hardcover of it. But absolutely lovely. Isn't that beautiful? So again, that's kind of retrospective world building. So it's nostalgic. So I would say this is actually fantasy, because it refers to a not quite pre-industrial, but it's at the point where there isn't a lot of industry, and we haven't quite come to that. I don't think it gives dates, but because Napoleon is invoked in here, that puts it at the end of the 18th century, the early 19th. So I think we can safely say that it's before the firework of Frankenstein exploded in 1918, really. So there we go. Now, again, I'm going to show this because this is a nice book. And this is somebody I reviewed recently, The Deep by John Crowley. This is his second novel. Is it his second novel?
I can't remember.
I think it is the second one, isn't it? Yeah. No, Ancient Summer in Methuen. Great cover, that. And this is one I remember enjoying more. An Engine Summer was meant to be a pun on Indian Summer, wasn't it? In the idea that people said Injuns, I-N-G-U-N-S. The character in this is called Rush That Speaks, isn't he? And this is very much like some. I mean, I always think of The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas and The Word for Word is Forest, where you have these very pastoral things, so much so that Norman Spinrad called her an eco-fascist, where you have these very pastoral settings, and yet with Crowley, underneath there are usually technological things going on, and it's about that way that segregated societies, or societies that have regressed from an industrial thing to a pastoral thing, is quite a big theme, isn't it? And we see that in lots of things, like in post-apocalyptic narratives, and even in some alternate histories, like, say, Bring the Jubilee, for example. But this is interesting because it raises something I watched the other night. I don't know if you ever watched Threads.
Yeah.
Well, I'd never watched
Threads. It in the day.
Well, for those of you who don't know, Threads was on TV in the UK. I think it was on the BBC, wasn't it? In 1984, and I didn't see it. I missed it. And it's just under 2 hours long, and it was a made-for-TV film, and it was scripted by Barry Hines, who wrote A Castle for a Knave, filmed as Kes by Ken Loach, and it's in the States, its equivalent would be The Day After, wouldn't it? The Day After was the big one in the States, and it's about a limited nuclear attack on the UK at the height of the 80s period of the Cold War, and I streamed it on the BBC iPlayer, and I kept comparing it in my mind to The War Game from the 60s, because The War Game, of course, was shot for the BBC, was never shown. It was effectively banned. You could see it in cinemas, but you had to be like a cinema member or something, a very limited release. I think in the States, it actually won an Oscar. I know it won some big awards. And I always thought, well, Threads is not going to be as good as The War Game. And The War Game, I think, is fantastic. But I was really shocked by how savage it was, because what it did, after doing all the stuff about what an actual nuclear attack would be like, it went beyond that into the nuclear winter, into the first 10 or so years after the impact of even a limited amount of bombs being dropped. And of course, something we're used to in SF is seeing not the immediate consequences of that, but the consequences 100, 200, 1,000 years later, like you see, say, in the Chrysalids. So you get that whole thing where everything's actually quite nice and pastoral, apart from the odd mutant tiger and things. So that was quite surprisingly savage. And you get that sort of thing in Crowley where those things may have happened, but it's a lot subtler. But it does put me in that, it puts me in that sort of frame of mind. So these things go back to a pastoral way of doing things. So, but again, I need to reread this because I've got a college.
So do I.
Yeah,
I read it about 30 years ago.
Somebody else we mentioned who, again, he's a classic example of someone who is a writer first, and then what genre do you put his books in for marketing purposes? Even though he did love science fiction, he made a commitment to it quite young. He always wrote other things. And that's Samuel R. Delany. This is Tales of Neverion. And this is the first of that sequence, which he said was sword and sorcery, and which were marketed as such. And it's an interesting thing, even in, you know, the mid to late 80s, nobody really would start their sword and sorcery sequence with a collection of short stories. No. You just didn't do it. In volume 1, you establish your team of people to go on the quest in the Tolkien-esque manner. And this is completely different. And I read this a while ago. And the Tale of Gorgic, which opens the book, which is about 70 pages long, is about a character who's a slave in this sword and sorcery type world. And it feels a little bit more like, say, North Africa. It has more of an exotic, non-Western feel. It doesn't have a Nordic feel to it. It's not the sort of Nordic sort of fantasy that we would get, you know, in somebody like Leiber or Poul Anderson or Moorcock even. It felt like North Africa or the Middle East. It's got this very sort of, how can we put it? Oriental, not Oriental. It's just got a sort of Levantine feel. Let's say it's got a Levantine feel. And it's basically about this guy who's a slave. And he becomes like a warrior at one point. And it's about, what the story's actually about is about civilization. And it's about how, when you're civilized, what you have to do, no matter what your station, is learn how to behave and how to speak with people in different stratas of society. And that's how you become accepted. So in a way, it's almost a plea for good manners, even when you're being exploited, which is interesting because, of course, with Delany, there's that thing about the body and being a servant or a slave and power, which is very much a Michel Foucault thing, which I think to a degree is related to Delany's sexuality. But that was interesting. And then there's a story called The Tale of Old Ven, which reminded me a lot, again, of something that Ursula did in a book like Tahano, where she really started to focus on the more, shall we say, feminist aspects of her work. And there's this second story, The Tale of Old Ven, you know, of a wise old woman who's tutoring younger women. It became like a real exercise in feminist identity politics. And I have to say it really annoyed me because it was just pushing that envelope. Now, of course, that wasn't a new thing then. Now it's really old hat, even though some people seem to think it's new. But it was a little bit too polemical. But again, this is the thing. Overall, you know, when I read Delany, no matter what I think he's trying to get across, except in books like, say, The Madman, where they have a more urban setting, is, you know, they're just absolutely beautiful, you know. And I go back to my favourite Delany, Triton, aka Trouble on Triton, which is just about a guy living on this Neptunian moon in the future, where technology is such that people can change their identity, they can change their gender. And it's just following this guy through his love life, basically. And he gets really fed up with women at one point, and he decides to become one instead. And it doesn't really work. And in the background, there's this thing about a war between Triton and Earth. But that's just the background. And it's very carnivalesque. And again, you can quite comfortably read Delany and haven't got a clue what's going on. And there's certainly moments like that in Dahlgren, but still enjoy it because
books like Nova, the thing, you know, I can remember when I first read them. Even though it's a fairly conventional book. It's, you know, it's the way it's written, the characters, the nature of the character, immediately makes it stand out above.
There's a sequence.
So much.
There's several things in Nova. It's little things, even though it's got the big galaxy spanning. Galaxy spanning plot, and they're looking for is it Illyrion? Which is rather similar to Pyari in Tiger Tiger by Alfred Bester. The Star's My Destination, for those of you who don't know the proper title, as it were. even though there's that, I remember things like there's a bit where who's the character who plays the Syrinx? Is it the mouse?
Yes.
Or the mouse is the thief? I can't recall.
He's the thief, I think.
But there's a bit where Delaney describes, and it's one of the spaceship parts where he describes the light falling from the instrument bank onto Mouse's face. And it's the sort of thing that bleeds into people like William Gibson. You know, I said in that thing I did about the Neuromancer being a mood piece. It's that thing about, you know, the sort of beauty that people think you can only convey on a screen through, you know, you get a filmmaker like, say, Nicholas Winding Refn, who uses a lot of blue and pink neon and things like Drive. You know, you can't do it in prose, and it's that ability. And that is what's missing much of the time from the nuts and bolts type people. Like, I mean, Arthur C. Clarke's an interesting one, isn't he? Because he's, you know, there's definitely like a mystical thing there, isn't there?
Yeah, I have to admit, like, he is not somebody I've reread recently. Yeah. But my memory of him was he generally tended to be a better writer.
Yeah.
But that could be just my memory.
He always had quite a mystical streak.
Yeah, there was a kind of more human warmth to it.
Yeah.
But again, it maybe just...
It's weird. When I've tried to read him recently, I've just stumbled because his prose just seems so clunky. Yeah. But even the things like, say, the 9 billion names of God, there's the computer works out the names of God and the stars that are God. Spoiler, sorry. But you probably read it anyway. There is that sort of thing, but it doesn't come across in his prose. No. It's quite bold and sort of direct. Whereas, you know, you've got to try and get it across in the prose, haven't you? And, you know, and as we're coming to the end of October, and I mentioned it earlier this month on the channel, we mentioned Ray Bradbury, and we were thinking about the books we were going to talk about, how you could pick almost any Ray Bradbury.
Well, he is a classic example of somebody who is a writer. Yeah. He is not a genre writer, but he's a writer.
He's a writer.
Who happens to write in almost every genre.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, children's, you know, crime.
I mean, when you look at this
SF fantasy.
There's outright horror things, you know, like The Dwarf.
Horror.
And there's things like The Watchful Poker Chip of Henri Matisse. You know, there are a lot of these are horror stories, but they some of them have elements of supernatural, but some of them it's just the feel of them. And it's that thing about walking down a lonely country road at dusk, and you're thinking, gosh, I'm quite away from home. I've got to get back home. The weather looks like it's turning. The wind is picking up. And there's a brilliant blurb on the back of this, which I don't know whether Bradbury wrote it. And interestingly, somebody watches the channel, Dan. He quoted this on his Facebook page recently. And it says, the October country, where it is always turning late in the year. That country where the hills are fog and the rivers are mist, where noons go quickly, dusks and twilights linger, and midnights stay. You know, and it's very, very much that thing, isn't it? And the story I really love in here, which I always think of, is The Scythe. And The Scythe is the one where the guy is harvesting in a field with a scythe. And the Grim Reaper is actually there, present, isn't he? And he's scything the world, and he's cutting down. People are dying, and that reminds me of you know the song. Do you know the song "Don't Fear the Reaper" by the Blue Oyster Cult? Where where Buck Dahmer and Eric Bloom sing 40,000 men and women every day. And "Don't Fear the Reaper" is a very strange song because it has kind of, to me, the feel that Bradbury has, and the feeling that because of they're saying, you know, death is inevitable and it comes for us all, and at the same, and it's lyrical and dark, and at the same time there's a kind of malign beauty about it. Because whenever I listen to that, I think, God, you know, people go on about satanic things in heavy metal, and what they're saying in this song is that, you know, because there's a line in it where the narrator of the song talks about a woman he knows, and he says she said that she couldn't go on, and it's sort of implying suicide, you know. So it's quite sort of, and you think, God, you know, it's quite a dangerous thing to cover, you know, in a work of popular culture. But I think Bradbury, you know, for somebody, and that's the wonderful thing. I mean, he's such a life-affirming writer, and so redolent with image and colour, and it, you know, it explains entirely why he made that transition in the 50s from the pubs to the slicks. He just jumped them. And all of a sudden, people like William Golding and all sorts of people saying, oh, he's just great, he's brilliant writer, because he could just write really well, It's that thing of writing the telephone book, So sometimes, with reading for pleasure, we just want stuff which is well written, If it says something, that's a bonus. And I think somebody who I always think about that way, who I love reading because he writes beautifully, and I sometimes get a bit frustrated with him because sometimes he doesn't say enough, or what he says is maybe a bit pat or minor, is Kazuo Ishiguro. And I feel very much that way about him.
I mean, that remains of the day.
Yeah.
Everything about that,
that's brilliant.
A kind of stately home, the servants and all that. It's the kind of thing like Downton Abbey kind of thing. It's the kind of thing I shouldn't like.
But when you read it,
the writing is so beautiful, the way it evokes.
And the restraint of the character, and the small decisions which lead to massive regrets and things. And there's obviously the nostalgia and what have you and things. But it's fantastic stuff. It just shows you that, I think one of the real problems we have with contemporary writing, and I can't see it changing really, and obviously it's still there. There's writers still writing like this. Is that it seems to me now that young readers, and maybe I'm wrong. If you're a young reader, call me out and tell me. But I think a lot of young readers, they want things which are too bold. They want the naked lunch put in front of them, unadorned. And they just want to be told what's going on, how to think, what to think, and that's not the mystery of great writing, is it? And like I say, rereading Orwell's coming up for air recently, which is about 270 pages long, and there's so much in it, but there's so much texture in it, and it's a wonderful book because it's a book about the past, the present is written in, and also the future which will come after it, and looking both at Bradbury, and this isn't a comparison I'd often make, and Orwell, is H.G. Wells looms that way, because I think one of the great things about when you first read Wells, when you read things like The Time Machine and War of the Worlds, and obviously at the time they were super modern, but they still are, because what's modern about them now is that you think, my God, all this stuff is happening in Victorian England. There's alien invaders coming down, in meteorites, and they're destroying Britain. They're taking over Britain. There's the Time Machine with its comments on what was happening, socially, what Wells thought would happen. So they're still astonishingly modern books, and yet they're lyrical, because Wells, he wasn't just, because the term science fiction didn't exist then, even though he used scientific romance. Wells was really, really popular. And, so he was in the same sort of ballpark as people like, say, Arnold Bennett and things. It was, the writing was good, and maybe that's the problem.
But he's another character author who wrote many different genres.
Oh, God,
again, you could argue it's all the same. It's,
So maybe the problem is maybe the problem has come in. I mean, we love science fiction, and we like, there's that whole debate, isn't there? Is, can you have a great novel? Should a science fiction novelist be a great novelist first? Can you make exceptions? Can something be an excellent science fiction novel but not a great novel in any other way? And I think there is an argument for that, which we talk about another time. But if somebody can do both, if somebody can be a good novelist and a good writer, and then they happen to write science fiction, and they choose to write something which is marketed as SF, or they decide to write an SF thing with the skill they've got, then I think that's when we really fall into a lucky place.
But there are people like Tim Levin, for example, who again, he writes. He just writes. Some of them are science fiction, some are horror, some are,
And he's a jobbing writer, isn't he? He writes an awful lot. But I mean, at his best, he's very good indeed. I mean, I think things like The Nature of Balance, and I mean, one of my favourite books by him is Berserk, which is a very traditional horror novel, but it's got some brilliant stuff in it. It really, really has. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. So we've discussed a bit about taste, prose, and what have you. Thanks again, Graham, for appearing on the channel. Thanks to all of you guys for your memberships and patronising. And we'll try to get back into doing this more regularly, because we haven't done it for ages for various reasons. A lot of which evolve around my health and your situation and stuff that we won't go into. And have a great weekend or whatever. Hopefully it's up on Friday night, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.